All right, I got a couple of emails just today on essentially the same problem. So what I want to do is go over the problem that some of you are likely to encounter as you work on, I think it's lab 9, the one with the meals and the categories. So one of the students graciously allowed me to use their code to demonstrate the error. And I'll show you what happened. And then we'll talk about why it happened, and we'll talk about what you can do to keep it from happening. All right, so let's go in here and open it up. And I've done the preliminary work of updating the database and that kind of stuff, so we're ready to run. So if I go and run this, I go to enter a category. And then breakfast and log description. I could type something more if I wanted to. I hit create, boom, and it sits there. Sits there and looks at you. All right, so I already know the answer. I'm going to demonstrate how I figured this out the first time I ran into it, because it's not obvious what's going wrong. Because let's look at the code for create. Let's look at the CSS_HTML to create category. Close some of these other things here. All right, so this is on post. How do I know it's on post, that event gets fired off? Well, I know it gets fired off because the method is post. So this is what gets executed, not when the page initially loads, but when the user clicks the submit button. All right. So it should be executing this code. And notice what it does. It does some it asks if the model is valid, or the context category is null, or the category is null. So that's making sure that there's something in there to enter. Like I didn't just click empty spaces, click save when there's empty spaces, or when that doesn't exist in the database. If it does that, if any of those conditions are true, it returns page. Otherwise, it goes ahead and adds a category to the context using that method. Note, we don't have to write a SQL command to do that, nicely enough. That category gets filled in, and we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that later. We save the changes, and then we redirect back to the list. Well, none of that happens. So if I put my code here, or if I put my breakpoint here, let's run this through debugger and see if we could find just exactly what's going on. So I'm going to start debugging. Go to categories, create new, type in breakfast, and breakfast. All right, it stops here. So I'm going to click step into and step into again. Is on this statement. And what that's going to do is it's going to return the page. So essentially it's going to reload the page without doing the save, which is exactly what we observed happening, right? When we clicked that submit button, the page was still there and the data wasn't saved. So that means one of these three conditions must be true. Let's look at that. Is category null? Well, we can look at category and we can see that no, it is not null. These are on the auto window or auto pane. To get to that, in debug, you can open up different windows. So this is the auto one. The auto one are the variables that the Visual Studio knows are kind of in play, that are being accessed. So is context category equal to null? No, it isn't. All right, we can click that and we're not seeing null. We're seeing that there's no members of it, but we're not seeing that this is null. So what must be true is model state is invalid. All right, that is false. So this is confusing because it says if not model state is valid. I think I misspoke the first time. So if the model state is not valid, so in other words, if it's not true, then we're going to execute this. Well, let's look at model state is valid, and it says it's false. Model state is valid executes when we do our validations on the stuff on the page. All right, we do our stuff in the entity. Remember, we did all that last time when, for example, we had, you know, if you didn't enter the phone number right, or you didn't enter the email right, or whatever, we would get an error. So let's look closer at this. Let's look at that model state. There's one error. All right. Let's look at the results view. I think that's where we can see the error. And the first thing it tells us is, it's a little hard to see, but the key category meal, subkey category meal, the validation state is invalid. So what does that mean? It means that the problem is with the property category meal. And we don't enter the category meal, right? We created that as a related table. So let's look at that category meal and see what could possibly be the problem. So I'm going to stop debug and I'm going to look at the category model. And that model has in it an attribute of meal. And what is the value of that attribute? Well, we can't enter in meals until we enter in categories. So there can be no meals associated with this category. Yet this list is not set to allow a null. All right. Therefore, it's going to give me an error because we're entering a category that does not have any meals. Well, that's absurd. It can't have any meals. All right. So what we're going to do, the workaround for this is we're going to put here a question mark. That indicates that this is optional. That it's okay to have a null set of meals associated with this category. When we do that, we'll be able to run this and save this. Go to categories, create. I'm going to enter in breakfast. Breakfast, save. And, oh, we still go through the debugger. Let's step through this again. Step into. Notice what? It skipped that whole if statement. So it's okay. It's going to go and try to add that category. So we're going to go into debug and say continue. And lo and behold, we have added that category there. So bottom line, too long didn't read, too long didn't listen. The category cannot say, or the category has to set the list of meals as optional, because when we first enter a category, there's going to be no meals associated with that. All right. So we change that by making it optional. All right. Step 2 of the problem. Let's go and try to add a meal. Go and add a meal. Create new. An omelet. Price is $12. We click create. You might be able to see that's coming, right? There's no place to enter in the category ID. All right. The way this was done, it was probably scaffolded before that related table was added. So therefore, category ID is not part of this. So we click create. Same thing happens. If we follow the same steps, let's do it again just to reinforce it. If we follow the same steps as we did before, create, put my breakpoint here. We stop there and we look, and sure enough, model state is invalid. Well, we could look at the model again. We could look at, we can see first of all the meal that it's trying to save. We could look at the model state. I think I clicked the wrong one. My results view. This is valid. That there's a value for name. This is valid, that there's a value for price. This is invalid, the meal category. Well, as it turns out, this was scaffolded before the user put, the student rather put the meal category as part of there. So they've since added that to the database and did the migration and updated it. So the solution to this would be one of two things. One thing to do would be to go and add category ID to the create. And let's go and do that. Shouldn't be too bad. I'm going to copy this guy. And this is necessary if you scaffolded, if you made database changes after you have scaffolded. My eyes are playing tricks on me here. All right. Is that all we need to do? Is there anything we need to do in the code behind? Well, let's look. None of the other columns are mentioned by name, so this should be able to work. So let's stop debugging. Oh, we already stopped. Let's start debugging again. and we'll go in and add a meal. So omelet, 12. Now, if I go and put 2 in, I'm going to get an error. Why? Because 2 is not in the category table. We only have 1 category, therefore we'd have to put a category ID of 1. And I have lied to you, because that does not work either. Let's run debugger and see what's going on with this. I have a suspicion, but I'm not sure. All right, model state is invalid. We come to expect that. Look at the model state. Results view is that saying that there's a problem. Wish I could expand this a little bit more. It says that the meal category ID is correct, but there's a problem that the category object that we defined in meal is empty. Well, that's true, because we have filled in the category ID, but that does not automatically fill in the category object. So a workaround to that would be to stop debugging and essentially do the same thing to the meal table. Make this category object optional. We could have skipped adding the category ID to the enter page and made this optional, but it's probably better that we went in and exclamation point, question mark, it's probably better to go in and add that to the screen to be entered. So now when we do that, it saves it correctly. We're still debugging. We still have our breakpoint in. Let's just say continue. And there we go. It added it to the index page. So it did add it. Bottom line, when you have these related things, be careful about what you make as required, because that can trip you up in validating. In category, of course, we couldn't have any meals associated with the category right off because we just defined the category. We couldn't define any meals, in fact, until we had the category entered. Now that we've defined a category, we could enter a meal, but that category object is going to show up as being empty, so we have to make that optional. Again, we could do that as a workaround to make that, but we probably don't want to do that because category ID is something that we really do want to require. It's just that category object doesn't immediately get filled in when we do an add. I've posted pretty much what I've said, a summary of it here. And I'm going to edit it. Several students have had this problem. If you don't have category in create, you'll get this error. You can add it to the pages. And I'm going to add to that and make category object in meals model nullable. Or a simple workaround, change meal model, make category optional. Not recommended. All right. So now if you notice that, we got that to work, but we had to enter in the category number. And that's not good. All right. So how do we make it so that we have it drop down? Because ideally that's what we want. Because right now, actually, let's run this one more time to see a different error. And make sure my breakpoints are gone. Well, we'll see if the breakpoints are gone or not. If I go in here and run this, right now I have to enter in for a meal. I have to know the list of category IDs. So if I try to go in and enter something else other than a valid, what happened here? Well, it passed all of the validations that the validators can do on the entry side of that. In other words, it looks like it could be, we have all the data items filled that should be filled, but we have a problem. And that is that we violated the foreign key constraint. In other words, there is no category 2. And because we define that as a foreign key, we cannot enter in a meal that has 2 as a category ID because there is no category with an ID of 2. So how do we prevent that from happening? The easiest way to do that, or probably the best way in this case, would be to create a drop-down. So we're going to take a look at how to do that today, and we're going to examine the courses in the Contuso application. I think we have that open, and we do. All right, I'm going to review the course and department to see how that is related. We're only going to look at those 2 things, at least for now. Our course, public integer course for the course ID, all this down the line. We then have a foreign key for the department, and we have an empty object or an object for the department that is relevant for that particular course. In department, we have courses, a collection of courses here. And it's funny because this looks a lot like the first example I gave. They must have other code that works around this in there. That worked around the problem that we experienced, because they don't have that error in this case. Anyhow, let's go and look at the course index page. Next page of courses. All right. Let's run this. And I believe I went over this last time, but I want to go over again because this is important. I go to courses and I see the name of the course, the credit hours, all that stuff. And I see the actual department name listed here. Gee, that's kind of what we would want to have happen with the category in the meals. In fact, after we look to see how it was done in this example, we'll go back and we'll do it in the category meals example. So how do they do this magic? Well, we look here. This specifies, I think in the past we would just have like these 2 lines, await course, await context courses, and then .2 link async. that would give us a list of all the courses. Think of these link commands like this, especially called with the method syntax, as we're creating and we're refining a list. All right. Our first step, we're saying fill up this list called courses, which is defined here, with a list from the database's context, the list of all the courses. So that will give us a collection of these objects, of these course objects. By the virtue of saying include department, we are going to include and we're going to fill in, where it says include, think of that as fill in. We're going to fill in the department object, this guy right here, in the course object. So then when we loop through and display this, we specify that what we want is a department name, which is not actually in models courses itself, but it's part of the department object, which is part of courses. So this is looping through each item in that course list. So each item is going to be a course object. So this is saying, give me the course ID of that object. Give me the title. Give me the number of credits. This is saying for that course object, give me for that department that belongs to that course object, the name. So let's go and do that in this case. And we'll use a short description. So the first thing we want to do on the index for meal, well, we already did that, or the student already did that. All right. Actually, I think they already did that, but let's look and see anyhow. I guess that saves us the work. They've done exactly the same thing. They've pulled all the meals and they filled in the category object for each of those meals. Then when we look at that, yeah, they did do it. Give me from the model, from meal sub 0, the categories short description, and then we display that here. So that's how we can display the description instead of the category ID. The category ID is typically going to be meaningless. That relates to the sequence in which the categories were entered. The first category entered is going to be 1, the second category entered is going to be 2, and so on down the line. All right. Well, we don't want just a 1 or a 2 or a 3 where the user of this website has to have memorized all the categories. Imagine we had 10 categories. It'd be fairly difficult to memorize all them. And if you got them wrong, you're liable to make some kind of mistake. Therefore, we want to display the description again. Now, the other thing we want to do is we want to make a drop down. And let's go back to the Contuso database and show how they make a drop down for that field. Because I go in here and I go and enter a new course, I don't have to type in the course ID. That course ID, remember, is an auto number field. How is it an auto number field and how does it know it's a primary key? Course framework knows if the column is called ID or the table name ID, that is an auto number key. It's really amazing how it does that. And if we look here, sure enough, in the model, it's called course ID. And it's a public int, and it's smart enough to know that this is automatically generated. I believe it is anyhow. I'm not really sure what that does anyhow, but yes, it's a generated one. So let's go in and add a course here. Create new number. Oh, that means it's not generating it. That's right. This is, for course, it's not an auto number key. For department is what I should have been looking at. And department is, because it's called department ID, smart enough to know that that should be an auto-generated value. Course one, we have to enter in the value. So 243, we'll say title web database, credits 4, and select department. We have a list of all the things that we can have for that department, and we go and create it, and it gets added to the list. All right, how do we do that drop down? Well, that drop down, excuse me. Let's look at the create page. Create page. We have our model. We have our page. Notice the model though. Those of you familiar with C# syntax, I assume you've all seen this before. Public class create model, colon, department name page model indicates that this model inherits from something called department name page model, which is defined as a class in here. Now, why do we do this? Why do we create inheritance and do things like that? We do it for reusability. We're going to need a drop down on the create page. We're also going to need a drop down on the edit page. Should I write that code twice to have the drop down on the edit page and on the create page? It's only a small amount of code, but the best practice would be to know. We're going to put that code in a common place and have my add model, or create model rather, and edit model inherit from that. When you inherit from a class, you get everything that's in that class, plus you can add stuff. So right here, department name page model. This contains, besides all this introductory stuff, this inherits from the generic page model. Okay, so it inherits from the generic page model. It has in this a select list. A select list is what we fill up to be used to create a drop down on our page itself. And this has one function, to populate this department name drop down. If we didn't use this superclass, or if we didn't use this parent class for those, we would have to write this code, duplicate it everywhere we needed it. So instead, we can create this and we can inherit it. So we inherit it in the create. We inherit it in the edit. CS, that is. Do we inherit it in the delete? No, we don't, because we don't need to change things on the delete page. We also don't inherit it on the details, because that's just displaying the details. We don't need to do that. So those are kind of out of play. But the edit and create, definitely, we want the same code to generate a dropdown. So we're keeping the onGet and onPost out of this parent class. We just have the code that we want to have in common. The edit and create are likely to have slightly different onPost and onGet methods, but they are going to have the same method to fill the dropdown. So we create this parent class, and edit the edit model and the create model inherit from that. So they get these attributes and this method. So let's look at what this method does. And this method uses the query version of this. I don't really like it. A good exercise for you, if you want to play around, would be to convert this query to use the method syntax. All right, this simply says from D in context departments. So it's retrieving everything from the from context departments. That is, it's retrieving a list of departments. We're ordering by the department name. We're saying, give me that department into this department query list. We are then creating a new select list using that list as a supply of data. No tracking is just for concurrency issues. We'll touch on those later on. Concurrency issues relate to if it's likely that two people are going to be changing the same piece of data at the same time. Something like departments, if you think in a college, departments don't change very often. So therefore, it'd be extremely unlikely that these two things would be, two people would be updating this at the same time. This simply allows for less resources if you say no tracking. So we're getting the data from this department query that we do here. What data do we want? We want the department ID and we want the name. Does the order matter? Yes. The order matters because this is going to be the value of the option in the select, and this is going to be the text of the option. And selected department is which value gets selected. And that's the, if you notice when we went to add, that's the one that says please select a department. This is slightly different on the edit, where we actually have a department, so it's going to pull up that department. Now, how do we use this? In the create code behind, we say populate department dropdown, we give it the context. So this method runs. We don't give it a department, so it's null. So in create mode, it's null, and therefore, when we retrieve this, we don't select any of them, so that sort of dummy please select department shows up as the first option. In edit, we populate it. This time we're giving it the department ID. So it knows to make the selected ID the department ID. And we'll see that. We'll compare when we add versus when we go into edit. Now, how do we make this? This gives us this select list object that's shared between these two code behinds. How do we actually make a drop down from that? Well, this way. We specify the label for course department, ASP for course department ID. Where does the data come from? It comes from the model in department name SL. Now remember that department name SL is defined in this, but because this inherits from that, then this attribute, department name SL, is part of this class as well. Likewise with the edit. And then that will give us a drop-down. We add to the beginning of that the dummy one that says select department, so that if nothing is chosen, that is the option that gets selected. So let's compare adding versus editing a course. We go in and go to add a course. That drop down says select department, right? Why is that? Because the add code behind file called that create drop down method with a null, and therefore none of them items are selected, and it defaults to the very first item on the list, which is that select department option. If we go and edit this, it sets the selected element to the value of the department ID in the course, and therefore it makes that the default one. An interesting thing, it doesn't allow you to choose the select option here. That's interesting. So this is how you're going to make the drop down. You do not have to make a separate page model class and have your edit and create code behind CS files to inherit from those. But it'd be really cool if you did. All right, it'll put me in a good mood, and it's me in a good mood is bound to help your grade, right? So you don't have to, but try it. It's not really that hard. Now, delete and details are like the index. We don't need a drop down, but we do want to display the department, so we include that in the query. Likewise with, well, that's details. We do the same thing with delete. We include that in the query. Let's look at other differences between edit. When we create, we don't retrieve anything right off the bat. So there's no on get. So the on get just displays a page. On post, we do this work to go in, and we've been accumulating all the data in that course object. And we set the data to that, and we do an add. In the edit, we do a little bit more because we retrieve that course object from the database. And then we go and we compare, and we do some things to make sure that the course 2 update is already there. We make sure it's there, the course to update, and we pull it from the database, and we make sure that it is still in the database because theoretically someone could delete it. And then we go and update the course. Are there any questions? Did you have a question, Kathy? Remember, I can't hear you. Okay, I can't really tell. I'm assuming that you don't. All right, that's all I had. Okay, I'm sure I'll have one next week. That's fair statement. Okay, so this should give you enough to complete the assignment that's due for next week, I think. And that's all I had for today. We'll see you in either in lab, or we'll see you next week. Next week, I'm not sure exactly what we go over, but we'll have some kind of fun. All right, we'll see you later.